What follows is an interview I conducted today on July 20th, 2020, with Dr. Veron Tryon. The audio in this video is less than ideal. I'll try to boost the levels a little bit to get a better volume level. But this is an interview I conducted about his work kind of coming to Oswego, but mostly focused around his work he did with the Futuring Project. I hope this is of some use to you. Have a good day.
Go back to the point when industrial arts came on the scene, it was in response to the Industrial Revolution. And so, the industries were developing and people were moving to cities to work in the industries. And the feeling was that we needed to have education to prepare people to do that. Well, in more recent years, of course, industries began to have a bad name. And so people began to think of another way to approach this. And what was obvious to a lot of people was that technology was becoming a very major force in our culture, and that technology ought to receive some attention. And so the vocational and practical arts areas of the state education department, and I'm sorry I can't come up with the exact titles of things anymore because they've changed, and I've been completely out of touch. A multi-year project where instead of looking at the existing curriculum and saying, well, how should we fix it? How should we tinker with it? The feeling was, let's not do that at all. Let's instead organize ourselves to look at the emerging culture. And so it became known as the Futuring Project. As I said, it went on for, 3 or 4 years. And each area, one industrial arts was one of those areas, home economics was another, and the vocational areas were others. Each area was set up with a couple of major committees, and they arranged to bring in futurists. These were people who, scientists and authors and social scientists and so forth, people who had gained some renown in studying the culture and trying to foresee what was coming, what was the future going to be like, what were those emerging trends that you could see and appreciate and begin to see, well, if this is emerging now, where will that lead us in the future? And so over a period of time, we had a series of meetings, and different futurists were brought in to give their take on things. And so the whole thrust of the Futuring Project was to say, all right, what kind of culture are we going to live in the years ahead? And what kind of education will people need in order to be effective in that culture? And so that was a different way of looking at it. And in the course of those discussions, we, of course, got a lot of ideas, a lot of new information. People began to think about things in a different way. And it was pretty clear as we went along in the Industrial Arts Committee that what we were talking about was something that you really couldn't call industrial anything. The word industrial simply didn't fit. And at some point, I made a motion to the whole committee that we formulate a subcommittee to study the nomenclature. And of course, as often happens, when you make a suggestion like that, they put you in charge of it. And so I ended up as the chairman of that subcommittee.
And that was a committee just for naming, correct?
That just had to do with the name of it, yeah. And it was within the context of the whole design of the curriculum. And I can no longer tell you who was on that committee. Names have long escaped me. I know there was a lady who worked for the telephone company who was very active. She was on the subcommittee, and there were several others. And we had some meetings. A lot of them were in fact, she set up meetings over the phone, so we had multiple phone hooks up. This was before computers and all stuff we have nowadays. And so we did some surveying of the country, got opinions from across the country. And as a result of our work, we came to the conclusion that the new curriculum that we had been talking about and that was emerging in our thoughts, that the best name we could find for it was technology education. And so that was recommended to the main futuring committee, and they adopted it. And then it went into the report and became part of the whole operation. And so really from that point on, the official name of industrial arts was technology education. And so that's where that came about. And that's been consistent, since that time. People have added other things. Engineering, of course, has been added in as an important component of it. We didn't really do that at that time. And I think because probably at that time, the perspective of most people of engineering was professional engineering. That is, professional engineers.
Yes.
We've never claimed that people who we used to call industrial arts teachers and now call technology education teachers, but we've never claimed they were engineers because they aren't professional engineers. But the word engineering has taken on a broader context. And of course, a lot of people who work, whose job titles are some type of engineering, aren't professional engineers in the traditional sense. But so that's a difference that happened since we did our work.
So you've been very consistent. I read an interview done with you in 2005 that says a lot of the same things you just said now. So I have a couple of
Is that the student named Pickering?
yes, correct.
Yeah, I noticed. He gave me credit for being the chairman of the Industrial Arts Committee, and I was not. As a matter of fact, right now I can't even tell you who was the chairman, because most of the people on that committee were not industrial arts people. They came from all different fields of endeavor, but I was chairman of the committee that came up with the name. But that was a subcommittee of the whole committee. So.
Okay, that clarifies a lot of things because I thought it was kind of interesting that you were the head of that whole committee and that you were kind of reaching all around the country. So that makes a lot of sense. But my other big question that I've been dying to know, and this has just been burning a hole in my brain, what names did you guys reject? We think about the process of iteration and prototyping. What names didn't you guys like? Were there any that are on the top of your head?
Well, there really weren't a lot of names that were floating around. We rejected anything that had the word industrial in it because that seemed to be a non-starter, no matter what you called it. There really weren't a lot of others. I think it was more a question of what name could we find that would fit would be a reasonable label for the kind of curriculum that we were developing. And I think we probably had a pretty good idea what that was before we even started. But we thought it would be prudent to find out what's going on across the country because maybe somebody else has got a really good idea that's better than ours. And we didn't really find anybody had. As a matter of fact, I think we were pretty much out in front on the name technology education, and a lot of other areas and states adopted it later on. So we were. I think we can reasonably claim to be somewhat pioneers on the subject of the name. But,
I really like the fact that you were very anti the word industrial. And I was thinking about it, and I think it might have something to do with the fact that you worked most of your career next to, some very, very tall smokestacks. Because in the Pickering interview, you talk about how, people had a negative connotation as kind of belching smoke, and then you look at the power plant right outside your door there, and it had just changed from coal to natural gas at the time of the futuring project starting.
Right.
So I think that's kind of a funny, I'm sure that you had a very global thought about it, but it's interesting to think about pulling into the parking lot behind Park Hall every day and then looking at those things.
Yeah, there used to be an enormous pile of coal out there.
Really?
I mean, it was a huge mountain. In fact, it couldn't bring coal in during the winter, so they bring it in all summer and they pile it. They had a power grader that was working on the top of this pile all the time, 24 hours a day to level it off and pack it down so it wouldn't blow away. Even then, a lot of dust blew into the city, so it was not a very nice thing at all. But yeah, that was quite a sight in those days because it was a coal burning operation. But, they later converted to oil.
So what came first? Was it technology education or the technological literacy movement?
Well, I don't know that we ever really addressed. I mean, technological literacy, I think, you could say was a goal that we were thinking about, but never, at least not in the Futuring project, that we really ever formalized it.
Yeah.
And, I think the feeling was that if we designed an educational program for the nature of the culture in which technology was going to be a very dominant feature, that we would have something that would be good for people, good for students, and we didn't really get into the fine points of what it meant to be technologically literate.
But that was kind of instilled in the curriculum at that time and instilled in people's thoughts, I think. They weren't saying technological literacy, but it was kind of happening regardless.
Right, yeah.
The farmhand was always technologically literate.
Yeah. You also wondered about the middle school requirement.
Yes, that's correct.
That was an outgrowth of this as well. And I'm a little fuzzy on exactly what things came in what order anymore. I might tell you before I forget it, I gave many of my original papers to the Penfield Library. You should be able to find those in the special collections downstairs. Their hours are somewhat limited, but I took them in, a number of months ago now. And so I don't know how they've got them organized. They may still be in the boxes that I took them in. And I also gave materials to Thomas Frawley, who at the time was active with the New York State, it was the New York State Technology Education Association at that time. Now it's got engineering in the title. He lives in Fulton. I haven't had any contact with him in a long time, so I have no idea what became of those materials, but they were meant to be an archive of the state association. But as far as the middle school mandate, that was a project, and much of that was done during the year that I was president of the New York State Industrial Arts Association, is what it was called. The following year, it became the New York State Technology Education Association. But the year I was president was industrial arts. And this all was forming at the state ed level. And we were trying to get information from the committee meetings that we had in Albany out to the field as much as possible. And it became clear that there was going to be there was work to be done, let's put it that way, to maintain a place for technology education in the curriculum. And I personally think it's fair to give the state association credit for that. While I was president, the first thing I did was to write up a description of how things were at that point with the Futuring project. And it was very clear that we had to take our story to the members of the Board of Regents, because they were, of course, the ones that were going to either adopt or refute or whatever of all this work. My purpose in sending that out to the leadership in the field was that I asked teachers in the public schools to make a point of inviting members of the regents who lived in their neighborhoods to come to their industrial arts classrooms, because that's mostly what they were all called at that time. But we had a lot of programs that were very forward-looking. They were not your old-fashioned traditional industrial arts classes, but there were teachers that were doing a lot of good new stuff. And we wanted the regents to see this, to realize what the potential was in relation to getting kids up and running to live in a culture where technology was going to be so important. So that was the first step. Then we, as things moved along, of course, we made proposals all the time. Some of us were on those committees, so we had a voice there, and making proposals and writing position papers and all that stuff. And it got to a place where at one point the regents were meeting in Albany, and that was the meeting, and I wish I could tell you the date, but I can't remember. But that was the meeting at which they were going to make the decision about whether this was going to be included or not, or how it was going to be included. And so I should back up a little bit. Prior to that meeting, of course, they met quite often, and we always made a point of having some of our association officers at their meetings. And so every time they'd take a coffee break or something, we'd make our business to talk to them and bring them up to date on what we were doing, and basically sell technology education and its benefits to kids every chance we got. Well, at this one particular meeting, when they were actually going to have the vote, they were meeting in the morning, and we had arranged to send a telegram to every one of them and have them delivered at this meeting at a certain time when we knew they would be taking a break. And so just as they were about to take their break, the Western Union guy arrived with all the telegrams, and so every member of the Board of Regents, and we were there, so we saw this, and we were able to talk to people at that time as well. And as a result of that, later that afternoon, we found out that they had voted to require a year of the study of technology in the course and the curriculum. And so that really was the first time that technology or even industrial arts was ever required. Previously, schools had to offer it, but students didn't have to take it. And so this became a requirement, so that every kid had to have a year of the study of technology, and they put it at the middle school level. So that was really quite an achievement. I remember we were at, I guess this happened when we were in conference, as I recall. There was a bunch of us anyway at a hotel somewhere down the Albany area, and we were in quite a celebratory mood, because it was really quite a step forward. And but really, as I said, it's no exaggeration to say that if we had not had an active technology education association at that time, I don't think that our discipline would have been in the plan at all.
We would have been just lost right there. That would have been the end of industrial arts / technology education.
It might have taken a while for us to disappear, but I'm afraid we might have. So that was really an important thing, and it really drove home the point of how vital our professional organizations are, because they work behind the scenes and they work diplomatically, and well, it's a lobbying group, let's face it, but we've got a point of view to put across, and I don't think we were off base at all, because clearly the kind of world that we're living in now, the students need some exposure to technology. They need to learn some of the basics so they don't feel so intimidated by everything around them.
Absolutely. Do you remember what the telegram said or what it was arguing? And was that an unconventional means of conveyance at the time? I don't know too much about the 1980s because I came 10 years later.
Well, it was sort of a compelling thing. Because remember, we didn't have email at the time or any of that stuff, and so it was a way to get a message in their hands. I mean, we could have sent them letters, but who knows when they would have read them?
Yeah.
Or they would have opened them. But by arranging this so it arrived when we knew they were there in session, and as I say, the messenger brought them in and handed them out right there at the end of while they were taking a break. We know they got the message. It was just a pitch and encouraging them to include a requirement of technology education and the plan for improving elementary and secondary education results in New York State, I think was the title of the whole thing. So that was a good day.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's certainly what got me interested in technology education. I remember taking that class and it being required, and all of a sudden you realize there might be some parts of school you're not so bad at.
Yeah. Well, a lot of students have a lot of talents that are very much technological in basis, and there ought to be a place where they get introduced to it and start to form some knowledge and understanding and realize, as you say, that there's a place here to start to identify a potential career eventually.
So I don't want to keep you too long because I know you've got stuff to do, but I've got a lot of other questions kind of off of the Futuring project, a little bit more related to how you got to Oswego. Do you mind talking about that?
Not at all.
So
I know exactly how I got.
Well, you came from Philadelphia, New York, and it sounds like you were handed a pamphlet at one point with the description of being "what a drool," which do you remember that?
Yeah. I had an industrial arts teacher in high school, S. Harold Curtis. He just died about a year ago or so, and he was a good teacher, although he was I think he went to Buffalo and then NYU, but he was still a good teacher. He didn't go to Oswego. But one day, he walked up to me during class and he said, "Have you ever thought of becoming an industrial arts teacher?" Now, I had taken all the classes he offered, which wasn't a lot because it was a small school. And he was only there half a day. He was at our school in Philadelphia in the morning, and then he'd leave at noon and go to Evans Mills, which is 7 miles away, and teach there in the afternoon. And actually, I never had, even though I'd taken all of his classes and I liked them and I did pretty well in them. I didn't. I just had never put two and two together and thought about, well, gee, maybe I'd like to teach this for my career. And so that got me thinking about it. And then a few days later, he came up to me again, and he had a little booklet that was put out by the state ed department. And it had pictures and short descriptions of a number of industrial arts labs around the state. And of course, they were the nicest, latest ones around. And it was a really attractive thing. And I still remember what he said. Now, we had a one-room facility. It wasn't a big room either. Didn't have a lot of equipment, so there were a lot of things we couldn't do. But we made good use of what we had. But he handed me this thing, and he said, "Look at this and rule." And of course, what he meant was that those labs had a lot of stuff that we didn't have. And then a while after that, he told me that he was going to go to Oswego to a conference. In those days, the conference was in the spring, and he was going to go to it, and he wondered if I would be interested in going down for the day. If I did, I could ride with him. And it turned out there were also two guys from Evans Mills that he had invited to go. And so the three of us rode with him, came down to Oswego and spent a day. And of course, we saw all the facilities and all the labs and all the stuff we didn't have in high school. And there was no question in my mind from that point on where I wanted to go to school. I never thought about any place else or any other purpose. And it turned out that two of us, one from Evans Mills and me from Philadelphia, did enroll here, graduated, and both of us worked in the field for our whole careers. The other guy did not go to college. He was a foster kid, and I don't know what became of him. I didn't know him outside of that one time. But that was, to me, was an example of I always tried to make the pitch to teachers when we're trying to recruit students for the college, that you have a lot of influence on students, and as a teacher of industrial arts in those days, you see what the students are doing, and you know which ones have, maybe not a gift, but an ability and a talent for things, and you can identify ones that would be really good potential for the college at Oswego. And I've always felt that was the really best recruiting tool that we could have.
And that's how I was recruited. So
Yeah.
now, what do you remember your high school program in Philadelphia? You said it was a fairly small room, but as someone who had so much influence on technology education, what was your technology education in? It would have been 1953, 1952, 1951, and 1950, I think, right?
Yeah, I graduated from high school in 1954.
Okay.
Of course, we had some woodworking. We had some limited metalworking, sheet metal, and we did have we did have a foundry.
A foundry.
And, yeah, we had a foundry. We could cast lead, basically. It was about all. And very little electricity, and technical drawing. In fact, one of the classes I took with him was I'm not sure what it was called, but it was the third level mechanical drawing class that he offered. And there were only two of us in the class, and the class was the last period in the morning. We'd go to the industrial arts lab, which is where it was taught, and the two of us and Mr. Curtis, and he would give us any instruction or whatever we were to do. And then about halfway through the period, he would leave because he had to drive to Evans Mills to get to this next class. And so the two of us would work there in the lab, or it was on, everything was operational. And, but there were no problems. Every once in a while, the principal would stop by and see what we were doing. That was not a regular thing. But I've often thought of that. I thought, my God, today you'd go to jail if you did.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Taking off and leaving your kids in the lab.
We took the class and finished the class. So, yeah. So I had enough of an interest and enough exposure to things. And then, as I said, when I came to Oswego, that was really what opened the world up to me as far as industrial arts was concerned.
And your parents were dairy farmers in Philadelphia, correct?
Yes. Yeah, my dad had a dairy farm. I'd lived on a farm until the time I went to college. When I was younger, he'd worked for somebody else, and then I guess when I was, let's see, I don't know when I was, because it was when I was in high school, he bought his own farm, and then ran it until he retired.
A great way to get started in technology education.
Oh yeah. So. You do a lot of things on the farm, and technical in nature. You have to do everything for yourself, and so I was involved with things like that, and so you learn things that way. Some of them are right, some of them aren't so right, but I do the job anyway.
And then, kind of fast forward 30 or 40 years here, when you got to the Futuring project, what led to the switch from shops to systems?
I'm sorry, say it again.
What led after the change to technology education? It seems like we're in more of a systems approach, transportation systems, energy systems, all that sort of thing. What led to the change? Am I wrong? Did that change not occur then?
Well, that came out of the Futuring project. In other words, that was the work. The Futuring project really launched a new way of looking at curriculum, and that was followed by a tremendous amount of effort across this state, in which the state ed department participated, but the real work was done by the teachers, and they would they would develop something in their own classroom, a unit of study on something with all the materials to go along with it. And whenever they would get together, like at our conference in Oswego or the State Association conference, everybody'd come to the conference with copies of stuff, and they'd exchange it with each other. And it was a bootstrap operation. And, our people were generous to a fault with anything they developed, and they just shared it with each other, and nobody was keeping stuff a secret because it was too good to let it out. It was deliberately shared generously, and so that really spread across the state and allowed. It was really a tremendous amount of in-service, and there was quite a bit of in-service work that was done. We got a number of grants at Oswego and had some summer in-service workshops for teachers to acquaint them with the new curriculum, but the organization of it was really the systems, because again, that's a more technological thing. It's not organized so much around the manufacturing sequence, but the system of the whole discipline of plastics or electronics or whatever.
So it was almost design centered in that we're changing from preparing people to work a material more towards preparing people to maintain and design systems.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
And then it looks like you graduated Oswego in 58 or 56?
58.
58, and then you ended up teaching a class like right out of college. You taught graphics for Oswego briefly.
Well, actually, I should have graduated in May of 1958, but in the spring of 1958, they had a vacancy because somebody had retired that year, but stayed on to teach in the fall semester.
I see.
And then left in January. So they had a vacancy in the middle of this year for the spring semester. So they hired me to fill that vacancy. And the reason I could do that was because I only had 3 more classes that I needed for my degree, and they were being offered that summer. So I took the classes that summer and graduated in August. In fact, it was the first year they had a summer graduation. And so I graduated in August of 58. And so that in the spring, I taught a course that they offered for elementary school majors, elementary school industrial arts. And I taught technical drawing. I think I had 2 sections of technical drawing. In fact, I just aside here, at that time, they had temporary buildings that were down fairly close down towards the lake, and the last one in the row was set up as one end and an art studio at the other end. So I was teaching technical drawing in one end of this wooden building. In the other end of the building was an art studio where the teaching was done by Roy Lichtenstein, and so I would wander in every once in a while and see what was going on in there. Of course, at the time, I didn't know it was him from Adam, and actually he was that famous then, but eventually became very famous and very wealthy, I'm sure. But that was that semester. Well, then, as I said, I graduated in August. And again, they had somebody resign late that summer, and it was hard to advertise and everything. So they again hired me for the following year. And that year, the job was to teach graphic arts. And so I taught, I taught 3 sections. In those days, the labs were 4 semester hours apiece. And so I taught 3 sections of the basic graphic arts course. And Ray Cornwell, Dr. Ray Cornwell, was the other instructor in graphics. And that was, well, even before that, I might mention another experience I had, and I think I was probably a sophomore. again, because I'd taken all the drawing that they had in high school, and I took more, of course, when I got to Oswego, and I was pretty good at drawing. One time, the Dr. William Huss, who taught technical drawing, was going to go to a conference, and so he asked me if I would meet with his classes while he was gone. So first class I went to, he said, well, just be there to help him and so forth. So I got to the first class, and he's given them the assignment to do a perspective drawing, but he'd never given any lesson on perspective drawing. So the students are saying they're lost. They didn't know where to begin. So, of course, I wasn't prepared to teach a lesson. I didn't think I was going to have to do that, but fortunately, I didn't know how to do a perspective drawing, so I did it impromptu. Again, that convinced me that working with college students was the best possible way to make a living, and I never regretted it after that.
You had some experience teaching that graphics, so it sounds like you taught spring, fall, and spring again, right?
Yes.
And then you ended up going to Maryland.
Yeah, then I got a graduate assistantship at the University of Maryland, and I worked with actually the man at that time was Dr. Donald Maley, who you'll see a lot of writing by him, and he did it. By the time I don't know how the timing worked out, but at any rate, he'd already filled his assistantships. But he was once I came on the scene and was interested in an assistantship, he hunted around and he found a person in the education department who had been allotted an assistant but hadn't done anything about getting one. So Dr. Maley graciously offered to let me fill this job. So I worked with a professor of math who was chairman of the College of Education Research Committee. And that was my job, was to be his assistant in that role. Well, I didn't do enough work to earn my keep, frankly, because he never asked me to do much of anything. The first thing he asked me to do, he said, we need to have a meeting of the research committee, so would you write up a memo to send out to call them to a meeting? So I did. It was a very straightforward email or memo.
Wouldn't be email at that point.
And so I typed it up and I handed it to him, and he looked at it, and he looked at me, and he kind of smiled, and he reached for a sheet of paper and put a sheet of paper in his typewriter. He proceeded to rewrite my little memo, and he handed it back to me, and he said, after a while, you'll get to know how I write. So that was my introduction to that job. But and then it turned out that was the year that, during that fall semester, the National Defense Education Act was passed, and the University of Maryland got 4 fellowship slots in that act. And that was the reason for that was that there was a shortage of college faculty in the country. And so this was to promote people to getting into college teaching. And Maryland, as I said, was allotted 4 positions. And you had to have 2 majors. So you had to major in higher education and then whatever your other discipline would be. So I applied for this thing. But the problem was you couldn't have more than 15 hours in order to be eligible.
Okay.
You couldn't have completed more than 15 hours. Well, if I had done my graduate work, would have allowed me to earn 20 hours that year by the time I would find out about this fellowship. So very many courses. I took a couple of non-credit language courses in the spring semester so that I wouldn't go over the 15 hours. And as it turned out, that spring they came out with the decisions, and I was given one of their and that paid for 3 years with a stipend and free tuition. So essentially paid for everything. The only course I ever paid tuition for in graduate school was a non-credit university after I came back here to work, because I needed to pass a standardized exam in 2 foreign languages
Oh,
for the PhD, and so I took that and passed the languages and got the PhD. So, but I was clearly very fortunate, very much at the right place at the right time when those things came along. So I ended up with a doctorate and didn't owe a penny. So,
you lucked out there.
yeah, I sure can't do that today.
And then you were teaching down there as well, right? At
Yeah,
Gaithersburg?
Gaithersburg Junior High School. I taught for 2 years. I actually had done a little bit of teaching at the university as part of my assistantship activities, but mostly after I finished my coursework at the university, then I took a job with Montgomery County Schools and taught industrial arts at Gaithersburg Junior High School. And
how did you like that? Was that pretty good, or you were happy, or?
It was the first year was fairly rough. My classroom control needed a lot of work, and so as it turned out, I guess it's either near the end or at the end of that school year, I got a call from Dr. Paul DeVore at Oswego, and he said, "We have a vacancy in the faculty. Would you be willing to come back to Oswego?" And I said, "Well, I've got 1 year down here," and I said, it's not been as good as I want it to be. And I said, "No, I think I need to stay here until I get this under better control." And so I turned the job down and stayed at Gaithersburg. And the next year was a very different year. Things. The part of the problem, I mean, obviously I was a beginning teacher, but it was a brand new lab. And when I first went in there was nothing set up.
Yeah.
The benches had been assembled and the machines were on stands, but there were no tool panels, there was no tool storage, everything was in boxes and crates and whatnot. And so the first several weeks, I basically spent every minute of every weekend building tool panels and getting this stuff and where you could find things. And so that was not a helpful thing, but eventually I got it sorted out. Had a good time, enjoyed it, and learned a lot. And as it turned out, the second year, he got the same call again. He had another vacancy, and he wanted to know if I would be interested. And I said, "Yeah, I think now I'm ready." So.
And did you really enjoy teaching graphics? Is there anything you got to teach at Oswego that you really was your favorite thing to teach? Or it seems like you went back and taught graphics for a while when you came back to Oswego.
I think I taught that the longest, the greatest. Basically, that's what I taught full time from the time I came in 1965 until I became department chair in 1972. During those years, I was teaching a full load of graphic arts, and I enjoyed that very much. It was a good area. And of course, we had nice facilities and all. And we had several nice colleagues. Arvid Vogel was one of them, and Darby Carlson later, David Fox later. So it was a nice assignment. I enjoyed every minute of it. But then as I moved into administration, other people took over in graphic arts, and I did some supervision of student teachers later on. I guess the other thing I taught most of the time was methods.
Yeah.
And I even taught microcomputer applications a couple of semesters. I really wasn't qualified to do that. We had somebody on sabbatical leave. Folks agreed that I could do it. So I did it. don't think I set the world on fire, but
Oh, that's too funny. And at the time you talked about teaching graphic arts, that wasn't mechanical drawing, right? That was more.
that was printing,
Okay.
lithographic, and letter. We had letterpress printing and platen presses
Yep.
and screen printing, silk screen printing, and we had several devices to produce black images that you could make paste ups for originals. And what else did we have? Oh, we even had an electronic stencil maker for mimeograph.
Okay.
Not that anybody would want that now, but that was the cutting edge in mimeograph technology in those days. But mostly was in offset lithography.
And where was that laboratory in Park Hall?
That was in Wilbur Hall.
Okay.
Now, when I came back in '65, Wilbur Hall had just opened up that spring. I came in the summer and started in the fall. So that facility was nice and new, but it was it was pretty much all there. I don't think there was anything really missing from it. There were still some things being done in the building, but I think my lab was pretty much complete.
And where was that lab?
It was on the ground floor in the 3-story section of Wilbur.
Okay. Yep.
Ground floor at the western end of that floor. There was a graphic arts lab at the end, and then there was a graphic arts lab just before that, to the east of that, and that's the one I was in.
Okay. And you were on the lake side or on the south side of Wilbur?
No, on the south side.
Okay.
I don't even know what's in there now.
Now that's all. I actually had a class in there for one of my my statistics classes. It's kind of like a flexible space, I think, where there's like teacher offices and then a flexible space in the middle.
Yeah, I haven't been in there in quite a long time because now with the virus, I guess you can't go in anyway. So
Yeah. Man, your son was really doing some incredible stuff there. He lived in that lab for a while, it seemed like.
Yeah, he was sleeping in there for weeks, I guess.
That was pretty incredible. He was fighting the good fight. Well, thank you so much for speaking to me today and letting me do all this. I have a recording of this for my notes. Would you mind me sharing the recording with my class or anything? Or
no, I don't care.
Okay, I think that'll really be a good resource for my class as well as for other classes in the future, as long as you're all okay with that. It's been really a privilege to talk to you. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate
your email mentions a title. And honestly, I don't know what that was. That could have been because quite often when I would have a futuring meeting in Albany, I would come back and write up a summary and share it with the faculty. So I don't know if that's what that document says, a summary of principal recommendations of New York State Industrial Arts.
Okay, yep.
I just, all of this work was done pre-computer. So I don't have anything on my computer related to any of this stuff. And as I said, I turned all the paperwork over to others as I just can't store everything now. So
yeah, this whole class has really been complicated by the fact that we just can't get into the library, and there's so much stuff that the library has that isn't digital yet. So they're certainly moving forward with that. Hopefully we can get some of those documents uploaded from the Special Collections Department eventually. But
yeah, I have no idea what they've done with the things I took over there. So,
but that was fairly recently that you took stuff in, correct?
Well, it was 5 or 6 months ago, I think. Yeah. I sorted out some stuff and things that I thought were worthy of going over there. I took over. I don't know just what the date was, but it's a matter of months. Mm-hmm.
Well, excellent. Thank you. Thanks a ton for everything, and thanks for the impact you had on my career, and everything you've done for technology education. So, thank you a ton.
Well, I wouldn't change anything. I've had the best job in the world. All the jobs I've had, I've always thought that I had the best job there was. So I wouldn't change anything.
I mean, if you go into work every day and you get to sit 25 feet from the table saw and you can work on stuff and teach our students how to do all this interesting, fun, satisfying work, it really is a fantastic job. So,
Yeah, it is. Well, good luck to you.
well, thank you. Have a good one. Stay safe.
Other things, don't hesitate to call me back if there's anything I can help with.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Bye now.
Yep. Bye. Thank you for listening to this interview of Dr. Veron Tryon, conducted on 7/20/2020 amidst the coronavirus pandemic. This is Colin Nobles. I've taken this recording. I have Dr. Veron Tryon's permission to share this recording. So thanks for listening all the way to the end. Thanks for your studies of technology education, and have a good day.